You're listening to
Sticky Note Conversations with Erika Washington. Way below acceptable. Way below acceptable.
On this week's episode,
my office is 2 blocks away from my elementary school. It's like a mile away from my mosque. My mom doesn't live too far, which was one of the main drivers behind me, like moving back to Vegas. But, everything that I love, whether alive or dead, is here in Nevada.
Way below acceptable.
Hey there, Sticky Note listeners. It's your host, Erika Washington. And I am excited to bring to you today a wonderful guest and a great conversation with a good friend of mine, Athar Haseebullah. He's the executive director of the ACLU of Nevada, which is Nevada's largest civil liberties and civil rights organization. He's been leading the organization since 2021. He's a civil rights leader, lawyer, and strategist, and just a really dope human being to know. Clark County Law Foundation's 2024 Liberty Bell Award, the National Bar Association's 2024 National Excellence in Activism Award, Las Vegas chapter of the National Bar Association's Attorney of the Year Award. He's also a double graduate of Howard University. 2 degrees, Bachelor of Arts in Political Science, and his Juris Doctorate from Howard University School of Law. Athar is someone I've known for many, many years, and even before he was a part of the ACLU, he was always deeply committed to the betterment of our community. And so I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as we do. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Sticky Note Conversations. I am your host and executive producer and creator, Erika Washington. And I am very excited today to have a lovely gentleman by the name of Athar Haseebullah on Sticky Note Conversations for the very first time, hopefully not the last. He is a colleague. I have known him for a number of years. I can't even actually remember when we met or how we met, but either way, he is the current executive director of the ACLU of Nevada. And I thought, what a better time than now to talk about what's going on with the Supreme Court. Let's talk about just what's going on in politics in general. And the ACLU is a resource for the state of Nevada. And I don't know if enough people use it as a resource as they should. So with no further ado, I'd like to welcome to Sticky Note Conversations, Athar. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Erika. Looking forward to chatting for the next little while about all things ACLU and civil rights in Nevada.
I am very excited to do the same. So I want to start at the beginning. First and foremost, I want to know, because you hold a lot of titles and you've got a lot of degrees and you've done a lot of things, but who is Athar? Who is Athar?
If I had to answer, I would just say I'm a community guy that grew up here in Las Vegas, and I've had the good fortune to be able to live in DC and then live in New York for a few years. I came back home 11 years ago to really try to make an impact in my hometown community, which is Vegas, and in my home state here in Nevada. So I remain committed to doing that. I think a lot of folks view me when I walk into a room as very, very serious, which I understand why, because professionally I am very serious and I take our work very seriously. But most of the time it's just like me and my friends and my family joking around, right? We're committed to making sure that we help our community, but also that, we let loose. So I always try to make sure that I have levity there. I hope that when I, walk into a room, folks don't ever view me as anything other than sort of their brother in the fight that they're engaging in, and, a fellow colleague and a peer. I also say, I think something that folks tend to get wrong about me, which is probably somewhat unusual based on some of the pieces of my academic and professional background, is I'm actually not a very ambitious person in general. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And then when the market ended up crashing and I ended up going to law school, I thought that might be something I wanted to do long term. I wanted to make an impact. I didn't know what that meant. But even when I was in law school, I only ever thought about being like a lawyer for a day, and I never had a long-term plan. And I still don't have a long-term plan, which I'm sure a lot of people are probably confused to hear about. But my ambition is really just in the work we do and the most amount of people we can help. And a lot of that has to do with my religious upbringing as a Muslim. And I'm a person of faith and still a practicing Muslim and will remain for the entirety of my life. But because of the justice orientation of my religion, that really kind of drives the work that I do. So any ambition I have is actually really rooted in the impact we make in our community. I don't really care about very much of anything else. My lifelong dream after this is all said and done would be to have a coffee shop or like a chicken wing truck.
Come on, coffee shop or chicken wing truck or a coffee shop that has chicken wings.
Now
I don't know. Those two things could very well go together. I think that sounds great. Do you cook well? Is this why you want to have a chicken wing?
I can, but actually I don't cook that well. Let me just kind of tell you about this vision. And so I hope nobody steals it, right? So years ago, I was like, I want to have a chicken wing truck, but I don't even want it to be in the US. My goal would be to have a chicken wing truck somewhere like in a beach town in Mexico. And I would call it the West Wing. And I would name all the wings after former American presidents. And I think it would be a hit because, in other countries, like some of the Pax Americana stuff just sells. And so I can cook, but like I don't cook that often. It's more the business and marketing aspect. And that's something I've always liked is really clever marketing. I love watching Shark Tank. If I picked a favorite TV show, it would be Shark Tank. I watch Shark Tank religiously just because I like seeing how people's minds work and how they're also engaged in public speaking. And it gives people the opportunity to really be creative in a different way. And not all of us have the opportunity to express ourselves creatively through different forms of art. So sometimes that comes through marketing in terms of pitching. And so I've always been intrigued by that. And plus, who doesn't want to live next to a beach in a place that has just relaxed vibes?
No, that makes sense. And I will say that every time I've left the country, one thing is easy enough to find is some American food, and it's usually chicken wings. If you go to the airport in Rome, the longest line is the KFC. And if you can act, and they have chicken wings at the Burger King in Rome. And I was just like, why do y'all have chicken wings?
I was in Trinidad like 5-6 years ago, and I didn't know that the original spice blend for like KFC was like formed in Trinidad, which blew my mind.
That makes sense.
Right? Yeah, so
that makes sense. So colonizing is colonizing.
Exactly.
Somebody's always going to take something. That Colonel Sanders and his 11 herbs and spices that all came from an island somewhere. It makes total sense. Well, yeah, no, that just so everybody know that's copyrighted. What he said, that's his idea. Don't let us find out. Don't let us find out. So are you born and raised Las Vegas? Are you born and raised?
Yeah, so I was actually born in Chicago. We moved here when I was a few months old. So my family immigrated from Pakistan before I was born. And so for us, the American experience, like it is for a lot of immigrant families, is kind of like you just try to find where you might be able to make it. And for most Pakistani Americans at the time that were immigrating here, when my folks immigrated here, Chicago and New York were like the only two hubs, and you kind of had to go wherever you were able to find work. And so we moved here when I was a little baby. I hadn't traveled very much outside of Nevada until I was a professional, because even when I was in college and law school, I didn't have a ton of traveling money. So I went straight through in school. And so I was always working and in school. And then I have been able, thankfully, as a professional now in the last a few years to travel a little bit more. But yeah, Vegas kid. And my family is still here. And it's a little unusual because like I get to do all these cool national stories too and work on these big cases and things like that. But my office is 2 blocks away from my elementary school. It's like a mile away from my mosque, so I can still go to prayers regularly. My mom doesn't live too far. She lives maybe 10 minutes up the road from here, which was the main driver behind me, or one of the main drivers behind me moving back to Vegas. My father was sick and passed when I was in high school, and I was one of his primary caretakers. We didn't have health insurance at the time, which is why people hear me like rail about the American healthcare system and how health insurance works. It's rooted in a deeply personalized story where I had my junior year and senior year of high school, while everybody else had a relatively normal social life they could engage in. I didn't have that opportunity because my mom and I were alternating shifts taking care of my dad, who was bedbound after he had a brain aneurysm and then passed shortly thereafter. And we were like on the verge of bankruptcy. So it's in part rooted in that. But, everything that I love, whether alive or dead, is here in Nevada.
What was it like as a first-generation immigrant growing up in the desert in Las Vegas? I can imagine that there's not a large population of Pakistan immigrants in Las Vegas. How did that affect your childhood?
Yeah, look, when I was a kid, there were very, very few Pakistani American folks. And our Muslim community in Vegas at the time also was not very large, but it's very, very diverse. And my mom always had us at the mosque. At whichever the mosque. So I grew up around those spaces and in those spaces, which was a really beautiful experience, I will say, in part because you really get exposure to people of different backgrounds, different ages, different professions, different cultures. So it's an eclectic pour in. And when I say I'm a product of this community, I mean that all the way through, because all these different groups, one of the few places in my experience that they tend to come together is at faith-based locations or at their worship centers. And for us, we had folks from all different walks of life that were part of our religious community and still are. And that gave me really good exposure to be able to understand what it was like to spend time with groups of people that weren't just of my background, but of all backgrounds. Probably part of my earlier experiences, 9/11 happened when I was in high school. And that was a big change point, I think, for a lot of Muslim Americans. That's when I went from being, you're kind of other, nobody really knows what you are, to society at scale sort of vilifying your entire group, regardless of what, regardless of the background that those individuals might even come from. It sort of became a universal hate moment on Muslims. I was talking about this recently with someone. The odd part about that experience, and I sometimes have to question myself, is around sensitivity surrounding certain things, is that how much of my reactions to things are rooted in an experience that I never snapped out of, which is this post 9/11 experience. And for whenever I hear folks talk about the world has moved on, people don't hate Muslims the same way anymore. And I think that's true to some degree, because I look at folks like, Zoran, who our community's immensely proud of. He's the crown jewel of our community, and I love him, right? But it does bring up questions, at least on my end too, about did society change or did it not? Because I never felt it snapped out of it, but maybe it did happen and it just kind of passed me by, right? And so a lot of what I end up dealing with in terms of civil rights issues end up rooted in understanding how the government operates and how discrimination operates, and then attempting to combat that. And so those are still works in progress. But the experience here in the community here is just, to me, it's second to none, because Vegas has really good people. I mean, I always thought, and having lived in New York, which I thought was very segregated and I did not think had the nicest people, but had the smartest, sharpest, toughest people, it's a lot different than coming from here, where I've always felt Las Vegas people are really good people. We just have so much infrastructure missing from this whole state that it makes every piece of work challenging. And there's certain things that we are missing here, but our communities are really what hold this place together.
And so from high school, and what high school did you go to?
Went to Gorman. Yeah, interesting thing on Gorman, when it used to be on Maryland Parkway. My mom, and I think this is actually somewhat typical of many immigrant families, there's a hyper emphasis on education, right? B's mean bad, right? And B is don't come home, right? That's what those letters stand for. For us, it was, and I grew up in a very deeply corporal punishment house where it was totally fine for if I got a bad grade, the expectation was I was going to get some kind of a touch point later that day, right? If I came home with a C, I'm sure, can I curse on here?
Yeah, say what you want.
Okay, all right, cool. Yeah, I would absolutely get my ass whooped in 100% of circumstances where there's C or below. So when it came time for high school, my mom made the decision at the time to say that she wanted me to be able to go to Gorman because she was convinced that like I had talent to go to Harvard or Yale University. And that's like part of a lot of people's dreams. But I think for immigrant families that come here, they look at that and they're like, once you do that, you're 100% made. And so I think on that front, my dad gets sick and, we didn't have health insurance, as I mentioned. And the one thing I'll always be grateful for my mom for above everything else, and I'm grateful for my mom for everything, she cashed her 401k to cover my tuition. I don't think it was the best idea in retrospect, but that's the kind of like investment she wanted to make, which is like, I'll be willing to throw away my entire retirement account to make sure you have the best education we can get you, which for our vantage point was like at Gorman at the time. I'm sure it's a lot more expensive now. It used to be like $900 a month, which then was like very expensive, I think. But yeah, so she cashed her 401k and put me through high school and then was off to Howard after that. And I will say, like, I would not describe myself as like the best Gorman alumni, but I will say I am a wonderful Howard alumni, which is really kind of like the institution that poured into me and made me who I am.
So I did a quick Google. Tuition at Bishop Gorman High School right now ranges between $15,400 and $16,800 a year, and it's $16,800 for non-practicing Catholics and Catholic parishioners. It's $15,400.
It's crazy. So. I feel like I'm hearing these costs with respect to, and I don't have any children, but obviously we follow this, and I'm always grateful for your work in this space. The cost of childcare right now, the fact that it's more expensive than like a expensive an expensive private high school like Gorman, like I fundamentally do not understand what the hell we're doing as a country when any of this is happening, but especially to put it in perspectives, we now offer, and I offer for my staff, if people have kids under kindergarten age, we also give a childcare subsidy because of how insanely expensive it's become. So when I'm hearing it's like $15,000, that's a lot, but like I'm also hearing it in the context of now all these horror stories I'm hearing every day about how much it costs for daycare, right? Like, which is insane, and all of it's problematic.
And also thinking about it from that point of view, child care for infants is more expensive and it gets a little bit cheaper as they get a little bit older. But the other thing to also think about is for parents and what they do with their children in the summertime. So even when they are in elementary and junior high school, the cost of daycare or day camp in the summer can be just expensive. And sometimes if you have multiple children, they call themselves giving a discount and it might be like 5% or we'll give you $50 off or something. And that's it. So, and you have to think about what to do with those kids all day long. And especially in Vegas where it's so hot, it's hard. You just can't send them outside so that they can die by fire because it's 115 degrees. So they need to be indoors. They're eating you out of house and home because they're eating all of the food and keeping your air condition down lower you need it to while you're at work. And instead of being able to send them to some enrichment camps too, right? You want them to learn how to do something, take up hobbies, whether it's sports or music or theater or whatever, but it all costs. And it's also expensive just to do the basics.
And to your point, Erika, we recently just got to this place, I feel like maybe in the last 10 or 15 years, where a lot of these programs even became available. When I was growing up here, there were none of these programs really available, maybe just a couple here and there. And it would have been hard to be able to access. And so now when we see these opportunities available and the fact that they become so cost prohibitive for folks, it is insanely problematic as we see money spent on other things instead of on ordinary families that need support, need assistance, and would benefit from it. And it's ultimately a societal benefit, right? We are trying to create the next generation of the best and the brightest and, vibrant community and give them all the different opportunities that didn't exist. And that's how society is supposed to grow. And instead, it feels like sometimes we're stuck in a wheel. So I know for our team, it's been important to be able to offer some layers of support so we can make sure that our team's able to work. But none of this is sustainable. The nature of even having like families now has changed. And I think a lot of us consider that when those decisions come up. I would say that on my end, I don't know that I would have been able to move in the way I've been able to move if I had a family, which is a really unfortunate reality that we experience as a society right now. If you end up having to be a caretaker, whether it's for your parents or for your children, and I've done one for a parent before, it's a time sacrifice as well as the money sacrifice. And when you add the two together, it makes it very difficult for people to position themselves to be able to get everything they want out of life. And it's an unfortunate reality that we're dealing with that hopefully we'll be able to address holistically and completely as time progresses. But it sucks to see and it sucks to experience.
You're listening to
Sticky Note Conversations with Erika Washington.
Why'd you go to Howard? How'd that come about?
So one of my mentors when I was in high school, we had always talked about civil rights work. And in my religious community, civil rights has been inherently intertwined, at least historically speaking, with significant number of Muslim figures, including folks like Malcolm X, right? And so like whenever we would hear Friday at our Jummah prayers, a sermon, and our religious services always end up happening on Friday at like 1 p.m. That's universal, and it's only 30 minutes long, so we're generally time constrained here. And I think that might be appealing to folks. So if folks are interested in Islam,
that's a plus to being Muslim. Come on, 30 minutes on Friday.
30 minutes on a Friday at 1 p.m. It's like standardized all across the country. But that mentor at the time had a lot of conversations with me about civil rights work and why it was important, and it helped form the basis for my understanding of how justice work actually goes. And then someone else at the time had told me, look at the list of alumni from any university you want to apply to and figure out who has the alumni list you want to be the most like. And that university will give you the most opportunity to be able to springboard yourself into a potential life that mirrors that. And so I only applied to 2 colleges when I was in high school, and the 2 were UNLV and Howard University. And Howard specifically I applied to because when I was going through the list, it wasn't just folks like Thurgood Marshall. It was also folks like Stokely Carmichael. And I was intrigued by the fact that a university had been able to produce both. And candidly on my end, I think it's something that some folks won't always gather, but I think folks who will. I've never been a part of a majority group. I've never been in a space that a majority of people looks like me. Not one time in my life have I been in a space like that. Outside of like if I'm at a religious place and I recognize that like we're gonna have majority Muslims here. But other than that, at scale in society, walking around day-to-day, job place, school setting, none of that had ever happened. The opportunity for me to be in a location where the institution was in fact not predominantly white and actually was in fact predominantly and overwhelmingly Black gave me the opportunity to understand a different perspective at scale and how to work and how to lead in spaces where everything is not Eurocentric. And I felt like everything up until that point that I had experienced at an academic level was incredibly Eurocentric, to the point where, most of what I ended up learning when I was a student at Howard, when we were discussing the Pan-African movement, when we were discussing what Africa looked like, when we were discussing what South America looked like and how colonization worked and what these other wars look like, I not one time had an experience that exposed me to any of those items before I was in college. My experiences in the texts that we received when we discussed like historical world happenings were focused on the Revolutionary War, in which there was a repainting of the narratives there surrounding the indigenous populations, the Civil War, where Northern whites were made to be heroes, and there was very little in the way of the actual discussions about what chattel slavery and the transatlantic slave trade actually looked like. and then discussions about the Holocaust with no mention of any other genocides committed in modern times or anything else of the sort. It was really limited to those three buckets. And so being able to get those different perspectives of what the rest of the world has actually experienced, including at the hands of our own government here in the US, was a critical foundational step for me to understand what the rest of this looked like. So me making the choice to go to Howard was rooted in a desire to be like the alumni. And if I can ever even get close to making, 1/100th of the impact that any given one of these alumni who have worked in these spaces have done, I'd be grateful, because that's, to me, like the point of doing justice work is all.
Did your mom, because her wanting you to do something, go to one of the more traditional Ivy League schools and knowing that was like the gold star, did she understand the importance of Howard?
So if I'm keeping it 100, my mom, just like so many people in my community, for like 6 months, did not understand the distinction between Harvard and Howard. Kept conflating the two words. And like still half the time, like I actually just presented at a panel recently and somebody else had brought up the same. Because the accents are strong. So like it sounds like Harvard, right? Like it's kind of like this combined metamorphosis of the terms. And so when I kind of broke down the university, she said, to her credit, I said, I had never been to Washington, D.C. before. And I haven't traveled out of state very much. I would like to go visit the university before I give a seat deposit or anything like that to fill out my financial aid paperwork. My mom and I actually ended up going on a 2-day visit to Howard. And I loved it. Like there was no experience. I still remember the moment I stepped foot on that university's campus as a 17-year-old. And there was nobody really on the yard at the time. But you felt like a different kind of feeling. It feels special. Our yard feels special to me. It felt like I was home. And it felt like this is the place I'm supposed to be. And UNLV looked nice at the time. It had friends here and all of that, but I really wanted to be able to understand what that meant. So we went on that trip for 2 days and I ended up paying my deposit, and it was the best decision I ever made in my life.
So you left Howard, but then you decided to go to law school. So you stayed at Howard for law school as well. And so a lot of times people go elsewhere because you could have come back to Nevada and gone to UNLV and went to law school. But you decided to stay at Howard because it felt like home and it was easier that way. Why stay at Howard for law school too?
Yeah, I'll say I was not a teenager that had deep confidence because I don't feel like I had deep opportunity. As I mentioned, my high school at the time was incredibly white. They were not going to feature me as like a person of tremendous attributes and potential. And they may say otherwise now, it doesn't matter. Like my experience was my experience there. And I remember still having a conversation with my high school guidance counselor that had asked me about career choices. And when I said, maybe I want to be like a prominent lawyer one day, told me basically my ambitions were too high and I needed to be realistic. And I was offended there in that moment. And it's not something that added a chip on my shoulder because I felt like that was emblematic of my entire experience there. When I went to Howard, I entered in as a regular student. And by the end of my first year, I had a 3.9 GPA. They added me into the honors program my second year. And they advanced the limited scholarship I had into a full scholarship. I got named an RA. I was very much supported by my colleagues, but so supported by the faculty at that time. And specifically, my Black women professors at the time, right? They poured into me. And it's something that for me is something that not only will I never forget, but made me who I am. And so when I decided I'm going to go to law school, economy crashes. I was actually supposed to have a fellowship before that, but economy crashes and everybody's like, oh, well, you might as well just stay in school and ride this out. You're going to have to go to graduate school or something else anyways. So they the university paid for me to have my LSAT prep course. And I did not when I was in high school. I didn't have extra money to do an SAT prep course and was taking care of my dad, so that didn't come in. I did an LSAT prep course and I did pretty well. I got a scholarship offer to stay at Howard Law. And then I got scholarship offers at the University of Illinois, which was well ranked at the time, at Boyd, which had opened recently, but they also gave me a pretty decent scholarship offer, and a bunch of other schools, right? I think I got into all but one school for law school that I had applied to. And when it came time to make a decision, I just thought about who believed in me and who supported me. And if I could go to this institution for another 3 years, how much I'd continue to grow even further, and the experiences I'd have that I'd be able to carry with me for the rest of my life. At Howard, there was no, especially at the law school, there was no look to your right and look to your left. One of them's not going to be there, go compete with each other. I never felt that way. I always felt like everybody had my back, right? And I know everybody doesn't always feel like that, and you're going to have your squabbles over financial aid and the administration, how that works. That's like part of the Howard experience. From like my experience, I don't think it's a bad one. It forces you to be able to advocate for yourself a little bit earlier. But I went there because I'm loyal to the institution, and I'll always be loyal to the institution. I'm grateful for every day that I stayed there for law school. I had paid my seat deposit at the University of Illinois and at Howard Law. And when it came time to make the decision, I was like, I can't leave. I feel like something's off if I leave. And I've always been a person that's like, if there's an opportunity, take it. And sometimes the harder thing to do is to stay. You start second guessing whether or not it was the right decision. But I'll never second guess that decision. Staying was the best thing I could have done for me, for my future, for the people I serve today.
Something that I was just thinking, when I think about the divisions that are both real and imaginative around immigrants and specifically African Americans, Black people. I have had a multitude of conversations over the years with folks who have immigrated into the United States who have talked about that they were told sometimes stay away from Black people, and that racism is almost ingrained in part of that American experience of moving to America. Is like, if you want to do well, that's not where you go. That's not who you date. That's not, where you congregate. But you dove right in and you are an American. You were born here and all of that, but you were raised by immigrant parents who then put on their values on you and that community around you. Was that a factor, or did that come up? How do you negotiate that space of the brown immigrant and the Black Americans and that friction that seems to stay prevalent?
Look, I'll say I have seen that type of racism and bigotry from many different families and many different ethnic groups as I'm hearing experiences from others, but it was never mine. I think part of that had to do with the fact that, earliest formative experience, I remember when I asked my mom how she learned English, when they first moved to the US and immigrated to Chicago. And the first thing she will credit is the Black man that taught her and like part of the rest of my family to learn English and help them navigate the American system. So their perspective was already one that was rooted in an understanding of what equality looks like, because when they were being treated as dehumanized people, as immigrants that just came here, that didn't have any money, that were receiving state support to be able to survive, that didn't have an understanding of the language, it was not white Americans that were looking out for them at scale, right? That was like part of the experience they had. But then the second piece became my faith and our community here. And I don't know what the actual demographic breakdown is, but I would say like about 50% or around that, around 50% of the folks that I knew growing up in my religious community were Black American folks. And that experience that they had was somewhat different than the immigrant experience or the child of the immigrant experience, but not very different. And because the not very different piece sort of intersected us, it gave a lot of earlier exposure. I'll give an example of how that manifests itself. One thing that really makes me proud of the religion I'm a part of is that our prophet, may peace be upon him, his last sermon maybe the most key piece of it was a statement of anti-racism, saying that no non-Arab is above an Arab, no Arab is above a non-Arab, right? And I'm not an Arab, but that piece in and of itself, when you start breaking down class warfare as a whole and class divide, is the beauty of my faith. And so I think the exposure pieces were so significant that it made sense. But there is no ability for anybody to really make an impact when it comes to civil rights work if they're not learning, appreciating, and honoring the experience of what Black civil rights leaders since the inception of this country and even before this country was conceived have done to make sure that these fights have been fought. So there is nobody that I look up to within, I would say, my own ethnic community in the United States as an example of someone that I have wanted to be like. My heroes that I grew up viewing as being the people I wanted to live a life like were Black civil rights leaders. And the reason why was because they were willing to risk everything for the sake of maybe helping one person achieve their dream of equality. And for me, based on my faith, that's what my faith also upholds. And so I view it as almost anything different for me would be violating the tenets of my own religion. So now when I see that manifest and how it ends up playing out, and if I ever see like Muslims engaged in any form of racism, I'm probably one of the most disgusted people you'll find in the world. And I'm very, very quick to immediately attempt to call that out, because the reality is that it's, racism is strictly prohibited in Islam. And I don't know that that's the case of every religion, but it is the case of our religion. And for any Muslim that ever gives tolerance to any form of bigotry in that way, I don't consider them a Muslim, because they're violating the most clear examples of what's been given within our religion, which is that justice is what's there to prevail. I don't know if you know this. We have a ban on even charging interest to people for a loan, because we recognize the cycles of poverty it leads people into. So it's like the concepts that I see now, if I tie them back to how I perceived things. And again, I don't agree with my religion on every single aspect, but for a lot of those key pieces on justice and civil rights and equality, so much of that is rooted in my religion, but so much of that is also rooted in understanding what Black folks have done to make sure that there's even a country that exists here. And I know that I wouldn't even have the opportunity to have these conversations if it wasn't for their struggle. So I think it's insane for anybody to even engage. If you're a brown person who engages in any anti-Black bigotry, you're really just self-hating and trying to be something you're not. There's no other way to describe it.
So I want to get to the Supreme Court, but what a question is still lingering to me, that you went to Bishop Gorman, which is a Catholic school. How was that to be a Muslim in a Catholic school? As somebody who also, I went to a Catholic school. I'm not Muslim, but I did go to Catholic school, and I'm not Catholic. But it was
right after 9/11.
Good school.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I got sent there. Again, it was supposed to be the feeder for Harvard and Yale, according to my mom, but it was unusual.
Or Harvard with an accent.
Yeah,
which is where you ended up.
Exactly. It wasn't unusual. So I will say that my peers, I really enjoyed. The faculty and administration at that school, for the most part, I did not. I thought they were very racist, if I'm putting it, point blank. I thought it was inappropriate, the way that they would try to intertwine politics and their own conservative, like religious and social views. I thought my peers were great for the most part, right? But I just didn't care for the administration. I certainly didn't care for the faculty at the time. I thought they were terrible. And I would stand by that. I think that, now it's probably in a different place. I don't know, right? But for me, it was an interesting experience to understand how this works. I remember getting in a line to receive communion before being told, like, hey, this line's not really for you. And so it was unusual, but I very much
I used to get in that line too.
Exactly. It's like, everybody else is doing it. But I will tell you, in the last few years, I've come as a result of Francis and then Leo, I have come to a newfound appreciation for the Catholic Church. And Leo is like my guy, right? I love that guy. I think he's done so much good for the Catholic Church. And so I always kind of liked the experience. And I also thought the whole like old school Gothic vibe was pretty cool. It was experiential for me, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful to anybody who is Catholic, but on my end, as somebody who's not a part of the faith, I viewed it as like really being like interesting and engaging, right? Almost like a form of religious expression as a whole, to see the robes, to hear the music. That was not something that I would hear every day. And so it was an eye-opening experience, just the same way it was the first time I stepped foot into an AME church, right, for a service. And I'm like, oh, wow, this is totally different than the other experiences, right? And like for Muslims, we don't have there's no music. And so like at all. And so seeing how these different faith groups operate, and I like to consider myself a student of religion as well, because I like to understand how people think. It was really a neat experience. And, if anybody has a specific church they want me to go to with them or service, like I'm always down to go. I think these are beautiful experiences. And I think when we see people oftentimes in religious settings, we're seeing them either at their best or their worst moments. And for me, it's a reminder of what human experience is like, right? Because you're not going to have the best experiences without the worst experiences. And being able to see that firsthand, participate in that firsthand, and be in community is always a beautiful thing.
Well, first, when I went to the Vatican, I just remember walking around the Vatican thinking, if Sister Stella and Sister Teresa could see me now over here. But I want to get into the Supreme Court because the ACLU, let's talk about the ACLU. First and foremost, for people who are unfamiliar, they may know the name, they may know the acronym and its civil liberties. And all, like, well, what does that mean? Like, what is the ACLU and what is its purpose in Nevada?
Yeah, so the American Civil Liberties Union, which is the nation's largest civil rights and civil liberties organization, I'll explain that breakdown in a second, has a state affiliate in every state in the country. And for the last 5.5 years, I have led the state of Nevada's affiliate. And our core tenet is to protect and defend civil liberties and civil rights. When I say civil liberties, that means individual rights and protections and liberties that have been afforded to you by the Constitution or by state statute, which is state law, or local law. And that could mean laws coming out of the Bill of Rights. That means your right to participate in free speech, and a right to free press, free assembly, and a right to be free from unreasonable search and seizure, and your right to bear arms. All of these that fall within constitutional protections, but also statutory rights that exist, right? And that becomes really important because that's the civil liberties component. The civil rights component requires that all people be treated equally. And so that when we're looking at our equal protection arguments and making sure that people are treated fairly across the board, regardless of what their background is, that's the civil rights component. We're not the American Civil Rights Union or the American Civil Liberties Union, but I will never, as will most of my peers, I will never, ever talk about civil liberties without talking about civil rights, because civil rights is what allows me as a brown person here in America to be able to have a conversation about civil liberties and be heard. So they work together. We do our work in 3 ways. We do it through community engagement and public engagement, which often means we do things like Know Your Rights trainings. Last year, we did more than 60 Know Your Rights trainings across the state on different issues, on immigration issues, on voting rights issues, on First Amendment and free speech issues, how you can successfully protest and do so safely without running the risk of arrest, things of that nature. We do our work also through public policy advocacy. So we'll lobby or advocate at the local, state, and federal levels. I do less federal lobbying work than I do probably local and state lobbying work. I can probably tell you more about voting issues in small counties here in Nevada than I probably can about what Congress's full voting docket will look like outside of the niche areas that I might end up working on there. And then obviously at the state legislature, we have a very large voice and presence there. And then the way that we're best known for our work, which is through systemic impact litigation. We sue the government, and that is what we are best known for. We only sue the government. We don't sue private actors. And we don't focus on taking on individual civil rights cases where there's a monetary goal at the end. That's not the way we do our work. There are private attorneys that we refer people to. Our goal is to shift the interpretation of public policy or law if there's a civil liberties or civil rights violation scalable. So our goal, again, is the modification of the law. It's not the money outcome. Sometimes the money outcomes come with it. But because of that, because we're limited in our resources, we really have been narrow in sort of what that looks like. And I want to say 6 years before I got to the ACLU, there were, I want to say 2 cases, 1 to 2 cases that were filed during that time period by the organization. I didn't inherit an organization with a vibrant legal team. I have had to rebuild that out. Many years ago, there was. We went from really one person on the legal team when I started who had just a few months of legal experience to now 6 or 7 of us are practicing lawyers who have experience. And that has been blood, sweat, and tears. We have the state's most active litigation docket. Nobody sues the government in Nevada more than the ACLU does. Nobody sues local governments more. Nobody sues state governments more. And certainly nobody sues the federal government more, right? We've developed a reputation for taking on these challenges because we're not afraid of government. It's a pleasure to be able to challenge the government, to hold them accountable when they engage in wrongdoing. And there's so much wrongdoing that occurs. And we'll continue to fight for people's rights even when they disagree with us, right? That's maybe the most important part of the work that we end up doing is that we defend everybody's rights, even if they don't like it and even if they don't agree with us. And we'll continue to do that. But I'm proud of that team. We do not have a huge team. I have 14 people on my staff statewide. About half of us are lawyers.
Whole state.
Whole state. We do not get $1 single in government support, not $1 of grant.
You're suing them. They can't get no money from them, man.
Because we're suing them. And the partners for most of these organizations are big business. And they're not very deeply interested, generally speaking, in supporting our work as well. The way we do our work and the way we fund our work is through support of individual people. So, we'll get folks that won't know about the ACLU until they need us. And they'll show up and say, I demand you help. I'm not elected. I'm not your representative. I'm not a government agency, right? Like we have to focus on what we focus on. And I have the good fortune of setting the vision for what this organization does and how we execute it. And what sets us apart from a lot of different organizations across the country is execution. I won't plan for something and then not execute it. Our goal is to execute. And I have never broken a promise. So if I threaten or promise that something's going to end up resulting in a lawsuit, it does. And it has. And we won. Every time I have delivered or made a statement like that, we delivered 100% of the time. I'll say, and I've heard this firsthand, I know sometimes folks will say like, oh, they're always getting media attention. They're doing this. They're getting yada, yada, yada. Yeah, you're damn right we do. And I'm going to keep doing it because that's what being a leader in these spaces ends up meaning is that we're going to brand our work and we're going to continue to do the work and we're going to scale our work. And I can't scale our work if we're ho-hum about it. So my job is to be the best promoter I can for my team and for our work. And I have a team full of introverted people, which is not always the easiest types of folks to be able to promote. They are not self-promoting, but I'm happy to promote their work as well because on every issue, if we're ranging from us suing the Clark County School District on Durango in a year fight that got $1 million for those kids after school police wrongfully accused them of having a gun, to suing Nye County for trying to hand count votes and stopping and shutting down that process, to suing on behalf of women firefighters who are incarcerated, who were given third-degree burns and the state ignored them, right? All the way up to every other case we've had to protect street performers, to protect protesters, which we have helped get dozens of those cases dismissed when people were wrongfully charged over the years, to now fighting for folks like Ricky Slaughter, who has been wrongfully prosecuted and abused by a criminal legal system that continues to be dangerous, to all of the immigration work we did. I mean, we just got another immigration bond decision this morning. 7 of the individuals who are part of our class action lawsuit that were denied bond hearings because the Department of Homeland Security had been released home because of our work on these cases. And these aren't mythical wins. They're real ones. That's not even including everything that we've ended up settling behind the scenes. Cases that have guaranteed access to repro coverage through Nevada Medicaid for repro-related issues that were being denied before we sued on the Equal Rights Amendment. It's been hit after hit. If I stopped doing work right now and my team stopped doing work right now, I would be happy with the legacy we've left behind with the cases we've won alone in the last 5 years. But I'm grateful that we have what seems to be a consistent amount of time moving forward to continue to develop new ways to stop the government from engaging in their forms of harm that they like to engage in. And I'm probably never going to get an award from the government. I see Clark County and the city of Las Vegas and all them honoring all these different Muslims. They have never decided to honor folks like me, right? And I don't want their awards, right? Like the reality is we don't want their recognition. If the government's deciding to recognize me for something went terribly wrong in the plan, right? Community backs us, and that's who we stand for 100% of the time.
Makes sense. So let's talk about the Supreme Court before we run out of time. The Supreme Court has been doing a lot. First and foremost, would you be able to explain why the Supreme Court works in the way it does, that we just get these decisions in the summertime, basically? You get this bulk of decisions over a few months or what have you, and then they're done. And then it's like, oh, we're done for the year, even though there's still things constantly going. Is there a reason for that system? And does that system work well for us as citizens?
Yeah, and I'll preface this by saying that, as someone who's not a general fan of the way this current United States Supreme Court has engaged in decision making, I would be concerned if they decided to do more. Their job is really not to serve as a trial court. We have trial courts, whether that's at the state level or the federal court. Their job is not to serve as an appellate court. We also have appeals court at the state and federal levels. Their job is to be the final court that makes a determination about the most complex legal issues that may require intervention. So every year, October, the Supreme Court's term starts. And generally, on average, between about 5,000 and just over 7,000 petitions are brought to the U.S. Supreme Court to ask for review. These are cases that people have asked the Supreme Court to consider, between 5,000 and 7,000 cases per year. And about 70 of those cases per year are actually received, and the court decides to take that on for consideration. 70. It's like less than a 3% rate, I think, right? And to put it in perspective, it's not like those 5,000 cases are trash. Those are like quality cases that have worked their way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. You have to have talent to even, be able to get to the posture where you're submitting something there. So they only take on less than 3% of those cases. Because of that, it puts a time crunch on things. And so October, generally, when the term starts, they start hearing the arguments. Arguments are complicated. Briefing schedules are complicated. These are not quick processes to be able to go through. So when the Supreme Court does this dump at the end of opinions that end up coming out, it's because that's the time that's been allotted before they go into the next term. If the United States Supreme Court were to take on more cases, I think it would be more harmful than less harmful. And I don't say that just because of the existing court. You don't really want any Supreme Court to have an overly active docket where they're deciding on everything, because then you have no consistency within society. The two things that'll end up happening are they're, generally speaking, going to affirm or agree with what's already been done in the past and follow precedent, or they're going to skip and change precedent. Most issues are not a case of first impression or the first time the court is hearing an issue of that nature. So because of that, we have a limited docket that they ended up hearing and a limited amount of opinions that end up coming out. And as someone who's a civil libertarian, that's not Libertarian Party of the United States. That's somebody who deeply values civil liberties above all else. For anybody who wants to understand the distinction, it is important for me to share with folks that having, the Supreme Court take on more decisions and a more expansive docket probably would not be in the best interest of people, just like oftentimes having more government at scale and sort of more intervention at scale by government agencies isn't the best idea. It becomes a scenario where it's like the solution to bad government is not more government, it's better government. And it's the same within the judicial system.
So tell me about the cases you think that were most important that came off of this year's docket.
Yeah, there was a few. In the ACLU nationally, my counterparts at my national office were involved in, and I should mention too, when I say national office, they're colleagues to us, but we're federated, which means we're an independently operating organization. So in Nevada, we raise our money from our donors here and our supporters here, our members here. I get to determine what our litigation docket looks like. There's nobody within a national office somewhere telling me, what we're able to do here. But that becomes really important because that's like that all across the country. But our national team is amazing and wonderful, and they're our closest partners. So we have a phenomenal relationship with them. They had a few cases before the Supreme Court this term. I'll say the case that got the most attention out of this term, first and foremost, was the birthright citizenship case. His first day in office, President Trump attempted to end birthright citizenship, and he did so because he's anti-immigrant. There's no question about that. Everything he said has been anti-immigrant, and specifically he's anti-brown and black immigrant. I want to qualify that because he does not have the same positions on white South Africans as he does on Syrians, on Haitians, and on others, right? And
they got gift packets when they got here.
Gift packets, and they're the only ones. They're the only ones that have really been getting offered refugee status because the president believes that what's happening, as he's articulated, against white South Africans, he has stated is a genocide, which is insane and maniacal, but that's the way that government, again, often operates. That case, though, was brought after the president signed an executive order within 2 hours of him signing that executive order that would prohibit birthright citizenship. The ACLU filed a legal challenge against that executive order within 2 hours. That case was brought to the U.S. Supreme Court this time. The court considered it. And in a 6-3 decision, the United States Supreme Court upheld the 14th Amendment's citizenship clause, which effectively states that anyone who's born or naturalized on U.S. soil and subject to the jurisdiction thereof is a United States citizen. And that language is very, very clear. Now, there shouldn't have been 3 justices that opposed that, but they did so for their own, what appears to be their own reasons, largely rooted, I'd imagine, in how they perceive the world. But that was a successful outcome for the ACLU, and the only case that President Trump actually attended the hearing for. He heard our national legal director argue that case, and it was an important one. That's the best way for him to get the crash course on the Constitution. So I'm glad he tuned into that one, and we're glad on the outcome of that one. We compare that, though, that decision to another decision that came forward just a week before that on temporary protected status for Haitian and Syrian people. And the president ended that program for those groups. And in a 6-3 decision in the other direction, in allowing for the president to end those programs, the court basically said that equal protection arguments that said that, the president's statements consistently, specifically about our Haitian brothers and sisters, which have been overtly racist. Anybody who says they're not racist is just a gaslighter at that point. There's no question that the statements had been racist. But the court said that those were not indicia enough alone to satisfy equal protection, which means that they didn't rise to the court necessary to establish an equal protection claim, and allowed the president to end those programs for Haitian and Syrian holders of temporary protected status. That's a huge deal. I've heard this from both black and brown folks here in the U.S. Who have said, why is there such a focus on these immigration-related cases? Why is there such a deep pushback? And the reality is there's going to be a deep pushback because this is an attempt by this administration to make sure at all costs that a white majority is protected in America. I don't think that there's any other way to define what's happening here. The president is committed to having a white majority and does not want to see a black and brown majority, despite the fact that we might all be Americans. That is dangerous. When you start engaging in policymaking that is inherently based on race in that fashion, that's the exact dangers of what we've seen happen historically in this country. And it is maybe one of the newest forms of attempts to push back against efforts that would lead to progress long term. I would stop short of calling it the new Jim Crow because that term has already been dubbed, but it is the president's way to re-whiten America. And I don't think there's any questions about that. But that's why I mentioned that those cases become really, really critical, because the equal protection arguments now are not just going to apply in this instance. The court will use the same arguments and how they undercut equal protection in that specific case on temporary protected status to now undermine other key aspects that would lead to civil rights protections. I don't think this is an administration, and I don't think anybody could argue this is an administration that has any commitment to civil rights whatsoever. They don't. They're committed, in fact, to ending civil rights. They gutted the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, right? And that's why we fight so hard on some of these. And there's other cases there too, but those to me are like prominent racial justice ones. We also had ones on voting rights. We had one on trans people rights. And I'm happy to talk about those as well. I can give some quick summaries there.
I think the trans athlete case is important to highlight, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. So there were two companion cases that were brought before the United States Supreme Court, and they heard it consolidated fashion. One was BPJ versus West Virginia, and the other one was Hecox v. Little. Hecox v. Little was a case out of Idaho, which is in the Ninth Circuit, which is where we are. So it was binding over what happens here in Nevada to some degree. In a 6-3 decision in that case, conservatives on the court found that trans people effectively were not protected by the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, and that schools were free to allow biological sex to be the determiner of whether or not a student would be able to participate in sports. The ACLU we are the attorneys for the plaintiffs in those cases that sought to end restrictions that both Idaho and West Virginia passed on the ability of trans kids to participate in sports in that same form and fashion. And the outcome of that case was a bad one for people across the country and a bad one for equal protection. But I will also mention that Nevada law is different than the law in Idaho and the law in West Virginia. And there still may be avenues that we're exploring right now to litigate out those issues. Now, I've heard from a lot of folks, and folks will tell me this privately because they don't want to seem that they, publicly that they may hold alternative viewpoints to equality. But I've heard folks that, have not been in favor of our work on this specific issue. And to those folks, I say that if you value equality and you value privacy, you would support our position. I am a cisgender straight man, right? I'm not a person who is directly impacted in the same way by these issues. And because I am a cisgender straight man, it is incumbent on me and everybody else who's like me to speak up for everybody who is impacted by these decisions and to stand alongside them in their fight for equality. The fact is that we have trans kids right now that are self-harming because government and policymakers and politicians continue to vilify them and turn them into a boogeyman when all they're seeking to do is to be left alone and to live a life as any normal kid wants to live, which is not to be under a microscope, which is not to be subject to abuse by politicians and those like them. So I'm really proud to stand alongside and support trans brothers and sisters all across this state and all across this country, and will never apologize for that. And there are some folks who will continue to peddle in hate-filled politics, and I see this out of politicians all the time, right? They'll hold a pride flag and show up to Pride, and they will speak on behalf of marriage equality. And then when it comes to our trans kids and our trans communities here, they will sit there silent. They will allow for there to be vilification of those groups, and I think it's absolutely disgusting. It is equality for all people.
Do you think that people have a hard time connecting the dots of when we other folks and say, oh, well, that's just about them. And that's just because that's wrong or that's different or that makes me uncomfortable, what have you. But that won't have anything to do with however I show up and how I present, because it would never happen to me. Instead of saying that they're taking individual rights away from someone based off of how they identify or how they look or how they, of what their sexual orientation is, how they move, how they live their life, that same thing can happen to anyone else for any other reason because someone else doesn't like it or they don't like how you look and how you move, how you breathe is a problem. So we need to do something about it.
Well, absolutely. We're indoctrinated as a society to be individualistic. Collectivism is not a deep part of American culture anymore, and that is rooted so deeply in the way that capitalism is perpetuated here, and inequity is perpetuated here. The operative terms that people will generally use throughout the United States is not, I want to have a happy and peaceful life, or I want to have a life where I'm comfortable. People will use terms like rich, right? And the opposite of rich is poor. It's a competition. And it's the same way on citizenship. Every time I hear, someone saying that they don't want people in this country, it always shocks me to my core, especially when I'm hearing people born here say that, we need to live at citizenship. They didn't earn it. Well, you didn't earn it either. Your mom chose to have you here. That doesn't mean that somebody else's mom who chose to have them, elsewhere is somehow less entitled to achieve the same dream than you are. It's a ridiculous insinuation. And it's really rooted in this concept of competition and being better than someone else. I think that's what it boils down to, is people look down on others. And we are trained as a country, we are trained as a society to look down on others. If we even look at it right now, Zoran Mamdani is, and I hate to bring him up again so it doesn't sound like a Zoran fest here, but Zoran Mamdani is, every speech he's given, every single speech he's given has been one that's been rooted in purity. He's talked about unity. He has said he will fight for every group. And there are still people attacking him, right? That's just part of the process. And the reason why they do that is because, again, it's this concept of, I may not be better than them, but I'm better than you. And that's a dangerous, dangerous approach to undertake. You know, I've heard even the narrative that they put out about protect girls' sports. The people who are pushing and peddling that narrative won't even fund girls' sports, and they won't even fund women's health.
They've probably never been to an Aces game.
Aces, their most active efforts as they're attempting to ban kids from participating in sports is to cut off reproductive health care through organizations like Planned Parenthood, right? That's like the same component of the movement. And all their arguments are rooted in misogyny as well. They never go to the concept of competitive advantage and what that looks like in weight classes or things like that. And I'll give a best example for where the arguments on sports participation fall apart. If me as a relatively, I'm not a small dude, but me as a man gets into a mixed martial arts contest with Ronda Rousey and people put out a betting line on it, I am not even close to a betting favorite in that fight, right? Like, nobody thinks I'm going to win an MMA fight versus Ronda Rousey. But the inherent nature of the argument is rooted in this concept that men are inherently stronger and more athletic and just are going to outperform every single woman in every single sport, in every single circumstance. And it's just not the case. They don't rule make around competitive advantage. They only rule make around vilification of groups of people. And in this specific instance, it's attacking trans kids because they find a group they can make politically unpopular and just attack nonstop. And the groups, the political institutions, and the politicians that should be standing up right now and saying, no, this kid is our equal, and we're going to fight for this kid to be treated as an equal just as any other kid would, those politicians went quiet. They're attempting to cave to the same people that are going to end up selling out all of our rights here shortly in exchange really for a couple of votes and a couple checks. But the reality is that if we're not willing to protect everyone in our community from these types of attacks, we're really not willing to protect anyone long term. That vulnerability is a glaring hole, and equal protection is designed to protect all people. So as I mentioned, we'll continue to stand up for trans kids in our trans community, whether people like it or not. Like that, my job as a civil rights advocate, by the way, is not to fulfill popular opinion. Civil rights are not designed to protect the majority. They're only designed to protect the minority of people. And so my permanent role is to protect every form of a minority that might exist when I discuss what civil rights advocacy work looks like. And then civil liberties advocacy means protecting everybody at scale, and we'll continue to do that. But, you know, for everybody who's a trans person in our community who feels like they're left behind and they're unseen, we see you and we appreciate you, and we're going to continue to fight for you. And we're going to do that because it's our obligation to do so, and because you're our brothers and sisters and we view you as our equals.
And I appreciate you saying that. I want to ask you, as a lawyer, as a executive director of ACLU, as a American citizen, as a Nevadan, as a human being. I mean, I ask everyone this question: what is democracy, and do we have it?
That's a great question. And if you ask any of the conservatives that comment on any one of my TikTok posts, or if you ask any of the conservatives I've debated with, they will be quick to tell you, we're not a democracy, we're a constitutional republic, without understanding what the difference is between the two. At its most basic form, democracy just means a system where power is vested in the people. And we have a participatory representative democracy. That means we elect representatives who do that. But we also have direct democracy in different elements, including the ability for us to go out and do things like collect signatures to be able to do a ballot question, right? A ballot question is direct democracy. We, the individual people who are eligible to vote for that. We also have a representative democracy where our elected officials go out and they're able to vote on our interests. I would argue that if we had a system of government, and I was to label it one, I would say we have a largely failed representative democracy, where the only glimmer of hope oftentimes ends up being full-on participatory and direct democracy. And I say failed representative democracy, not because I'm trying to sound pessimistic or unhopeful, because I actually think we're potentially coming out of that failure now with electing populist candidates that are focused on the people, on working class issues, on ordinary folks, on our day-to-day struggles, instead of helping billionaires profit to no end while violating our individual liberties and rights, which is the exact scenario we find ourselves in. And it's not limited to one party. You know, as somebody who is a lifelong Democrat on a personal level, our organization is obviously fiercely nonpartisan. But as somebody who was a lifelong Democrat, I don't even know what the Democratic Party nationwide has become. I can't tell you, because they don't seem to have any values changes day to day. The only thing they can say is they're not Trump. That doesn't mean anything to ordinary people. And so, do we have a democracy? Yes. Do we have a strong democracy? No. Will we have a strong democracy? Yes. And the reason why I say yes there is because generational gaps. Gen Z deeply values equal protection. They deeply value the humanity in others. And if we look at polling data and electoral results, right, the silent generation and boomers do not have the same level of empathy and belief in equal protection and equal rights for all as Gen Zers do. And eventually and inevitably, Gen Z will end up controlling politics. The prevailing theory, I think, that that many have that are like boomers or the silent generation is that at some point Gen Zers are going to turn into them. It's just not the case. They've been exposed to harms they've seen. These are people that are ready to lead now. They're not going to betray their principle. And if anything, they may continue to shift further into the notion of equality. I won't say progressive, because that term, I think, continues to be convoluted by some. I was just talking about this with folks earlier today. Is like, I can't define progressive as a term. I can tell you what I think progressive means, but I think if you ask a bunch of people here, they'll say my views on things are not progressive and their views on things are, and vice versa. But I think there's great hope moving forward to actually have a democracy that works for ordinary people. But we are not there yet. And I think Congress is the best example of that.
So my final question before we go is, you as a person, you as Athar, what is your version of the American dream?
That's a great question. Nobody's ever actually asked me that one before.
I'm full of great questions, which is why I have a podcast.
I agree. My version of the American dream would be an America where, regardless of how somebody looks, and regardless of where somebody comes from, regardless of the income level that a person has, and regardless of the background that a person is perceived to hold, that all people are treated with dignity and with respect, free from government intrusion, free from government surveillance that vilifies them and antagonizes them and others them, and with an opportunity to, at a minimum, be afforded a chance at fulfilling whatever their individual dream might be, and with a guarantee that everyone in this society will have a basic level of care. An America where no person should think twice about whether or not they're going to go into a hospital room or into a hospital or to receive medical treatment because they're worried about the bill that might come afterwards because they don't have health insurance. An America where every child goes to school and they don't have to worry about being bullied because their parents may not have the same amount of access to income, and they may not have access to a school lunch, but where the quality of their education is prioritized. And in America where jobs aren't displaced to automation, and people are given the chance to be able to succeed and be able to afford a home and not be forced out by predatory landlords. An America where all of these things are true. And finally, in America where more money is spent on protecting Americans than it is bombing other countries and destroying other parts of the world. One that's free of influence from groups that continue to peddle lies, to allow for capitalistic expansionism into all of these places under the guise of protecting these populations while destroying all of these civilizations and causing chaos worldwide. One where we don't have people who are unhoused. There should be no unhoused Americans, period. And maybe that's an unpopular take to some, but for a nation that continues to say this is American exceptionalism, we have American exceptionalism, we are the richest country in the world, the fact that any veteran could find themselves sleeping on a street is a disgrace. And my version of the American dream would be one where that disgrace no longer continues to exist, and that ordinary people are the decision makers and not the billion-dollar corporate interests that continue to run over all of our rights.
Well, Athar Haseebullah, thank you so much for being a guest on Sticky Note Conversations. I knew this would be a good conversation. I do follow you on TikTok already, so I already get your hot takes. If other people would like to follow you and get your hot takes, how do they find you?
Well, first, I appreciate you for having me. And it's nice to connect in this space. And I'm always proud of your work. I know we don't always get to say this enough as counterpart and peer executive directors, but you've inspired a lot of folks, and you've done such great work throughout our community, and you've been a badass standing up for issues a lot of people won't speak on and comment on. And you take risks, and I've always admired and appreciated that about you. If folks want to follow me, don't add me on Facebook because I don't check Facebook like that, but you are welcome to add me on TikTok and Instagram, Athar, ESQ, Athar, ESQ. You can also follow ACLU NV on there. If you follow me, do not inbox me with legal requests, please. You can ask if you need a referral somewhere, fine, but my inbox generally gets flooded. I don't even know the number of people I get that ask me for representation via DM. That is not a good place to do it. And I'm not just saying that because that's not the way that we operate. If you think Meta is securely keeping all of your messages free from government intrusion, you've lost your mind. There's no possibility of that happening. So do be careful about when you're DMing as well. But other than that, folks will see me out in the community, and always feel free to stop by and say hi. And for those that are interested in learning more about the ACLU, you can follow us at ACLU NV, and you can also sign up to become a member. As I mentioned, we're a large organization, but the strength of our organization comes from our membership. That's how we end up moving forward on most of what we do. And we're over 1 million members strong nationwide. We have more than I think close to 8,000 here in Nevada. And we're proud of that, and we're continuing to grow. And so we appreciate all the support, and appreciate you, Erika, for giving us the platform to chat through these issues today.
Well, I appreciate you, and thank you so much. And I never thought about people would be DMing you with probably giving too much information about stuff going on with them. And also, Athar is saying he is not legal aid. You need to contact legal aid. So hopefully you will come back. I could see a space for you to just give us updates on whatever is happening in the state of Nevada or elsewhere, because this show is heard anywhere that you stream, whether it's Spotify or Apple or YouTube. We're everywhere, but we're also on the radio every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. on KUNV. So make sure you tune in. There will be an edited version of this airing on Saturday morning, and then the full version will be available streaming after it airs on the radio. So I look forward to having you back again to talk about all the things, because there's always so many things going on at any given moment. And I think that your expertise and ability to be able to explain complex legal issues is it's a talent. I think that you can read a lot and still not necessarily understand or be able to give that information back to someone else so they can understand how it affects them directly. And I think that is a part of the problem when it comes to politics. A lot of times in policy, people don't see themselves in it because they don't understand, because there's a lot of extra jargon that, in my personal opinion, sometimes is unnecessary to say, So, but You are here. I am here. We have other great folks in the community that helps try to break those things down. And I always push for people to use the resources that we have because there's a lot of stuff available to us.
That's right.
So once again, thank you so much, Tar. And this has been Sticky Note Conversations. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as we did.
Thanks for listening to Sticky Note Conversations with Erika Washington. Hosted and executively produced by Erika Washington. With editing by Black Gypsy LLC. Special thanks to KUNV 91.5 in Las Vegas. This show is powered by Make It Work Nevada, a project of Tides Advocacy.